The Duke banished her with cruel words. After 2 months, a letter reached with only 4 words. The crackling fire in Lord Caelan Thornwood's study did nothing to warm the chill that had settled in his bones. 2 months had passed since he had banished her from Morwind Court, yet her absence echoed through the halls like a persistent ghost. Outside, rain lashed against the windows, mimicking the tempest in his heart. "Your Grace," announced Mrs. Hollins from the doorway, her weathered face pinched with concern. "A messenger has arrived." The Duke looked up from his untouched brandy, noting the mud-spattered envelope in the housekeeper's hands. Even before he saw the handwriting, something twisted in his chest. Recognition, perhaps, or fear. "Leave it," he commanded, his voice carrying the practiced authority of generations of Thornwoods. When the door closed, he reached for the letter with fingers that betrayed his composure. The seal, simple wax without a crest, broke with a sound that seemed to fill the cavernous room. Inside, the paper bore only 4 words in a familiar, elegant hand. "Come before it's too late." The Duke stared at Leora's writing, the words burning into his vision. His cruel dismissal had been witnessed by half the household staff, her departure marked by his thunderous proclamation that she would never again cross his threshold. Now, those 4 words reached across the abyss he had created. Mrs. Hollins returned to find him standing by the window, letter clutched in his fist. "Have the carriage prepared," he ordered, not turning to face her, "and send word to Brackenridge Haven that I shall arrive by nightfall tomorrow. But, Your Grace, the roads are flooded." "Then the waters shall part," he replied sharply. "I have allowed pride to delay me long enough." Within the hour, the Duke's carriage departed Morwind Court, wheels cutting through mud as the rain continued its relentless assault. Inside, Caelan Thornwood clutched the letter, the 4 words a lifeline through the storm. The journey to Brackenridge Haven devoured a day and night of tempestuous weather and equally turbulent thoughts. Each crash of thunder seemed to echo his final words to her. "You are nothing to this house, nothing to me." Falsehoods, all of them, spoken in wounded pride when whispers from the ton had poisoned his ear with tales of her supposed duplicity. Lady Serena Valahart had wielded those rumors like a finely honed blade, and he, fool that he was, had allowed them to sever what he most cherished. Dawn broke weakly over the coastal village when his carriage finally arrived. The modest cottage where Leora had sought refuge stood against the grey sky, a thin tendril of smoke rising from its chimney. Before he could reach the door, it opened to reveal a stern-faced woman with silver-streaked hair pulled tightly back from her face. "Merith Caldor," she introduced herself, blocking his path. "You must be the Duke who cast her out." "I am Caelan Thornwood," he replied, mustering dignity despite his travel-worn appearance. "She fought to live long enough to write that letter," Merith said, her eyes narrowed with judgment. "Do not waste what she has paid for with suffering." The woman stepped aside, allowing him entrance to the cottage. The interior was warm but sparsely furnished, dominated by a narrow bed where a figure lay still beneath woolen blankets. Leora's face was pale as bone china, her once vibrant features now delicate as if carved from alabaster. The small amber pendant she always wore seemed too heavy for her diminished frame. When her eyelids fluttered open, recognition sparked in those amber depths. "You came," she whispered, the words barely audible above the hissing fire. "I would have come through hell itself," Caelan replied, sinking to his knees beside her bed. Her hand, when he dared take it, felt like winter leaves, fragile and cool to the touch. Leora's amber eyes searched his face with painful intensity. "Even after your declaration that I was nothing to Morwind Court?" she asked, her voice strengthening momentarily. "I spoke false words born of wounded pride," Caelan confessed, his thumb tracing the blue veins visible beneath her pale skin. "When your letter arrived—" "4 words," she murmured, "all I could manage before the fever took hold." Merith Caldor moved silently about the room, preparing a steaming tisane that filled the air with the scent of herbs. Her disapproving glance toward the Duke did not escape his notice. "She has fought pneumonia these past weeks," the healer explained curtly. "The damp of that cottage you relegated her to nearly sealed her fate." Shame burned through Caelan's chest. The small residence at the edge of his property where he had instructed Leora to remain until arrangements could be made for her departure. He had not considered its condition, so consumed was he by the whispers that had poisoned his trust. "I believed lies," he admitted, his gaze never leaving Leora's face. Lady Serena spoke of letters exchanged with Lord Arden, of plans made— "Serena," Leora breathed, a flicker of understanding crossing her features. "She always desired your attention. She would have said anything." A fit of coughing seized her then, her body convulsing with the effort. Merith rushed forward with a cloth and Kaelin watched helplessly as bright spots of blood stained the white linen. When the spell passed, Elara lay back exhausted, her breathing shallow. "You need not explain," she whispered. "I called you here not to hear apologies." "Then why?" Kaelin asked, his voice breaking despite his efforts to maintain composure. "So you would not live with regret if I—" She left the sentence unfinished, but its meaning hung in the air like the scent of impending rain. The Duke's face twisted with anguish. "You shall not die, Elara. I forbid it." A ghost of a smile touched her bloodless lips. "Even a Duke cannot command death, Kaelin." Merith approached with the tisane. She must rest now, the fever rises again. Reluctantly, Kaelin moved aside, watching as the healer helped Elara drink. The amber pendant around her neck caught the firelight, throwing gold reflections against her throat. "I shall remain," he announced, his tone brooking no argument. Night descended on Brackenridge Haven, the storm returning with renewed fury. Kaelin maintained his vigil, watching as Leora's breathing grew more labored with each passing hour. Merith dozed in a chair by the fire, her stern features softened slightly in repose. In the darkest hour, when even the fire had dimmed to embers, Leora's eyes opened with sudden clarity. "When you sent me away," she whispered, "I thought it was because you had discovered the truth." Kaelin leaned closer. "What truth?" Her fingers weakly sought the amber pendant. "About my father's debt to yours. About why I first came to Morwind Court." "Speak plainly, Elara," he urged, his heart thundering in his chest. "I came as a companion to repay what my father could not," she confessed. "But I stayed because—" Her voice trailed off as another coughing spell seized her. Dawn broke reluctantly over the cottage, grey light filtering through the simple muslin curtains. Merith stirred, immediately checking Leora's brow with a practiced hand. "The fever has broken," she announced, surprise evident in her voice. "I had not thought—" Kaelin, who had not left Leora's side, exhaled a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. Throughout the night, he had watched her struggle for each breath, had whispered promises into the darkness, promises of redemption, of a future where pride would never again separate them. "She lives, then," he said, the words part question, part desperate prayer. "She lives," Merith confirmed, her perpetual frown easing slightly. "Though recovery will be slow. The damage to her lungs—" Leora's eyelids fluttered open, her gaze more focused than it had been since his arrival. "Kaelin," she murmured, "you remained." "I shall always remain henceforth," he replied, taking her hand between both of his. "Leora, last night you spoke of a debt. My father owed yours a considerable sum," she explained, her voice stronger though still fragile. "When he died, leaving nothing but debts, your father agreed to cancel the obligation if I would serve as companion to your mother in her final illness." Understanding dawned like the weak sunlight outside. "You came to Morwind Court as repayment." "Yes," she admitted, "but I stayed long after your mother passed because—" She hesitated, color finally returning to her cheeks in a delicate blush. "Because," Kaelin prompted, his heart suspended between beats. "Because I grew to love the man behind the ducal facade," Leora confessed. "The man who read poetry in the library at midnight, who spoke kindly to the lowest scullery maid, who mourned his mother with such silent dignity." Her words struck him with the force of physical blows. All those months she had remained at Morwind Court, moving quietly through its halls. He had assumed it was the comfort of position that kept her there. Never had he imagined her heart might be engaged. "And then Lady Sirena began her whispers," Leora continued, her fingers tightening around his. "She claimed I sought your title, that I had schemed from the beginning." "I believed her," Kaelin acknowledged, shame coursing through him anew. "When I heard you had corresponded with Lord Arden, my father's solicitor," Leora clarified, "I sought to learn if any small inheritance might have been overlooked. I wished to repay your family honorably, not through servitude." The full weight of his misjudgment crushed down upon the Duke's shoulders. He had condemned without evidence, had cast out without allowing defense. "I have wronged you beyond measure," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "Those cruel words I spoke, they have haunted me every moment since." Merith approached with a cup of broth. "She needs nourishment, Your Grace. Words of remorse will not restore her health." The healer's practical assessment broke the tension of the moment. Kaelin moved aside, allowing Merith to help Leora sit up slightly, supporting her as she sipped the warm liquid. Outside, the storm had finally abated, leaving behind a washed landscape and cleared sky. Through the window, sunlight caught the sea in the distance, turning it to hammered silver. "When you are well enough to travel," Kaelin said, watching as Leora's strength visibly returned with each careful sip, "I would have you return to Morwind Court, not as companion or servant, but as its mistress." The cup paused halfway to her lips, her amber eyes widening. "Your Grace, Kaelin," he corrected gently, "and I speak not from guilt or obligation, but from that which I should have acknowledged long before Lady Sirena planted her poisonous seeds." "And what is that?" Leora asked, her voice barely above a whisper. The Duke of Thornwood, heir to one of England's oldest titles, knelt beside her bed with the humility of a penitent. "That I have loved you since you sat reading to my mother, your voice never faltering even as she slipped away. That I have loved you through every season at Morwind Court, though pride prevented me from declaring it." The broth cup trembled in her hands, and Merith swiftly removed it before it could spill. The healer retreated to the far side of the room, affording them what privacy the small cottage allowed. "4 words brought you to me," Leora said softly. "What words shall I trust to keep you?" "I offer you not words, but a vow," Kaelin answered, taking her hand with reverent care. "What I destroyed in pride I shall rebuild in humility. What I severed with cruelty I shall restore with tenderness." Leora's amber eyes searched his face, seeking truth beneath the eloquence. The small pendant at her throat caught the strengthening sunlight, casting golden reflections across the bedclothes. "A vow is but air, unless sealed with action," she replied softly, "and I have learned to fear the changeability of a noble's heart." Her words, though delivered without rancor, struck him deeply. How readily he had cast her aside on mere whispers, without granting her the dignity of defense. How swiftly his love had transformed to contempt under the influence of poisoned words. "Then judge me not by what I say," Kaelin responded, "but by what I do henceforth, beginning with this." From his coat pocket, he withdrew a sealed document bearing the Thornwood crest. With deliberate movements, he broke the wax and unfolded the paper. "This morning, while you slept, I dispatched a rider to Morwind Court with instructions. This is the confirmation, delivered moments ago." Merith moved closer, curiosity overcoming her habitual severity. "I have dismissed Lady Sirena from my household permanently," Kaelin continued. "Her falsehoods nearly cost what I hold most dear. The tongue may whisper of scandal, but I shall bear it gladly rather than harbor deceit beneath my roof." A small, incredulous smile touched Leora's lips. "You have risked your standing in society." "I would risk far more," he assured her, folding the paper and returning it to his pocket. "Your health is my sole concern now. Merith believes the sea air will aid your recovery." The healer nodded grudgingly. "The lungs heal better with salt and sun, but she cannot travel for at least a fortnight." Kaelin turned to the stern woman. "Then I shall secure more suitable accommodations here in Brackenridge Haven. This cottage, while clean, lacks the comforts necessary for proper convalescence." "There is Hammond House on the cliff path," Merith suggested, her tone suggesting reluctant approval of his initiative. "Empty since autumn, but well appointed. See it prepared by nightfall," he instructed, slipping her a heavy purse. "Spare no expense for Miss Marin's comfort." When the healer had departed on her errand, a fragile silence descended upon the cottage. Leora's breathing remained labored, but her eyes held new vitality. "You speak of rebuilding," she said carefully, "but the foundations were flawed from the beginning. I came to your household to pay a debt, not as an equal." Kaelin moved to sit beside her, his aristocratic bearing momentarily abandoned as he leaned forward earnestly. "The circumstances of your arrival matter not. It is who you became at Morwind Court, who you revealed yourself to be, that holds significance." "And who is that?" she asked, a vulnerability in her question that tore at his heart. "The woman who completed my mother's favorite poems from memory when her eyes grew too weak to read the page. The one who organized the Tenants' Harvest Festival when tradition had been neglected. The soul who saw past my title to the man beneath." His voice lowered to a confession. "The only person in my life who never sought advantage from our connection." A fit of coughing interrupted whatever response Leora might have offered. Kaelin immediately poured water from the pitcher at her bedside, supporting her head as she drank. "Forgive me," he murmured. "I exhaust you with words when you need rest." She shook her head weakly. "I have rested enough in silence these past months. Your voice—" She paused, gathering strength. "Your voice is the medicine I require now." A knock at the door announced Merith's return. The healer swept in, her practical energy filling the small space. "Hammond House will be ready by dusk," she reported. "I've sent for Dr. Ellis from Thornwick. He attended the previous tenants and knows the property. Excellent, Kaelin replied, rising to his full height. What else does Miss Marin require for her comfort? Her own clothing and possessions, Merith answered bluntly. What she brought from your estate was meagre and much ruined by the damp of winter. 2 days later, Leora sat propped against pillows in the airy bedchamber of Hammond House, watching sunlight dance across the distant sea. The elegant residence perched on the cliffs above Brackenridge Haven possessed a serenity that Moorwind Court, for all its grandeur, had often lacked. Dr. Ellis had visited that morning, pronouncing her improved but far from recovered. The lungs heal at their own pace, Miss Marin, he had cautioned. Patience must be your companion now. Patience, a virtue she had cultivated through years of service, of watching and waiting. Now it must sustain her through this strange limbo where the Duke of Thornwood knelt at her bedside by day and retired to a guest chamber by night, his presence both healing and unsettling. The door opened, and Kaelin entered bearing a mahogany box inlaid with mother-of-pearl. From Moorwind Court, he announced, placing it carefully beside her. I sent instructions to have your belongings packed and brought here. Leora traced the box's delicate inlay with trembling fingers. This is not mine, she said softly. I possessed no such fine case. It was my mother's, Kaelin explained, a certain hesitancy in his manner. I thought, that is, I hoped you might consider it yours now. She opened the lid with care, revealing neatly folded garments of finer quality than she had ever owned. Beneath them lay books, her modest collection expanded with volumes from the Thornwood Library that she had admired but never possessed. These are not my belongings, she observed, lifting a shawl of dove-grey cashmere. Not those you left with, he acknowledged, but perhaps those you deserve. A shadow crossed his face. When your possessions were retrieved from the estate cottage, many were found ruined by winter damp. I took the liberty of replacing them. Leora's fingers lingered on the soft wool. This represents more than I earned in a year as your mother's companion. You were never merely a companion, Kaelin replied, seating himself in the chair beside her bed, though I failed to acknowledge it until faced with your absence. She studied him in the clear morning light, the proud features now softened with humility, the aristocratic bearing tempered by genuine concern. 2 months had etched new lines around his eyes, had threaded silver at his temples that had not been there before. Your letter, he continued, those 4 words, they shattered something in me, Leora. Pride, perhaps, or the walls I had built around my heart. I wrote in desperation, she admitted, her voice strengthening daily under Merith's care. The fever had taken hold and I feared, she swallowed. I feared dying with words unspoken between us. Kaelin reached for her hand, his touch gentle yet insistent. What words, Leora? What remained unsaid when I cast you out? Her amber eyes met his directly, all pretense of deference abandoned. That I loved you not for your title or position, but despite them. That the distance you maintained, the coldness you affected, they were the true barriers between us, not my station or circumstances. Her honesty rendered him momentarily speechless. In all his years as Duke of Thornwood, none had dared speak to him with such unvarnished truth. You see, she continued, drawing strength from his silence, when Lady Sirena whispered her poison, she merely exploited a weakness already present, your readiness to believe the worst, because you had never permitted yourself to accept the best. And what is the best? He asked, his voice barely audible. That someone might love Kaelin Thornwood, the man, rather than his grace, the Duke. She withdrew her hand from his, folding it with her other in her lap. But perhaps such a notion threatens more than it comforts. A knock interrupted them. Merith entered with a steaming cup of medicinal tea, her sharp eyes noting the tension between them. The doctor instructed rest, she reminded them pointedly. Emotional exertion taxes the lungs as surely as physical. Kaelin rose, bowing slightly to both women. I shall leave you to recover your strength. There are matters requiring my attention in the village. When he had gone, Merith helped Leora drink the bitter infusion. He flees from truth, the older woman observed, yet returns to seek more of it. An unusual man, your Duke. Not my Duke, Leora corrected gently. And perhaps not unusual, but merely unaccustomed to honesty without deference. Merith's weathered face softened slightly. You've given him 4 words that summoned him across counties in storm and darkness. What will you do with the thousands of words that remain between you? Leora gazed out at the sea, her amber pendant catching the light. That, she replied softly, depends on whether he truly hears them. Hammond House settled into a routine as March yielded to April. Dr. Ellis visited thrice weekly, noting Leora's gradual improvement with cautious optimism. Merith Caldor, having relocated from her cottage to serve as nurse and companion, maintained a watchful presence that both comforted and occasionally constrained. Caelan divided his time between Hammond House and necessary business in Brackenridge Haven, where rumors of the Duke's extended stay had inevitably blossomed into speculation. Each evening, he dined with Leora in her chambers, their conversations deepening as her strength returned. On this particular evening, with spring rain pattering against the windows, they had lingered longer than usual over dessert. Leora, dressed in one of the new gowns Caelan had provided, a simple design of cornflower blue that complemented her amber pendant, appeared more like herself than at any time since his arrival. "Dr. Ellis believes I might attempt the garden tomorrow, should the weather clear," she announced, setting aside her barely touched trifle. Caelan's expression brightened. "That is excellent news. I shall accompany you, of course. And Merith," she added with a small smile that acknowledged the proprieties they had begun to observe as her health improved. He nodded, understanding the necessity. Though Hammond House stood removed from society's immediate scrutiny, the Duke of Thornwood's presence in the sick room of an unmarried woman of modest background had not gone unremarked in the village. "I received correspondence from Morwind Court today," he said, changing the subject. "My steward reports that Lady Serena has been most vocal about her dismissal from my household." Leora tensed visibly. "What has she said?" "Nothing that need concern you," he assured her quickly. "Her words hold no power now that I recognize their source." But Leora's gaze remained troubled. "The Tun listens eagerly to scandal, Your Grace. Your reputation, Caelan," he corrected gently. "And my reputation concerns me far less than your recovery." She studied him, searching for the proud man who had once valued society's opinion above all. In his place sat someone altered, still aristocratic in bearing but somehow unburdened. "You've changed," she observed. "Near loss often transforms a man," he replied, his voice deepening. "When I read your 4 words, Leora, I confronted not only the prospect of your death but the death of possibility, of all that might have been had pride not blinded me." The intimacy of his tone brought color to her cheeks. "And what possibilities do you envision now, Caelan?" He reached across the small table, his hand covering hers. "I would speak of them, if you are strong enough to hear such matters." A discreet knock interrupted the moment. Merith entered with Leora's evening medicine, her timing suggesting she had been listening at the door. "Miss Marin requires rest if she is to attempt the garden tomorrow," the healer announced, her tone brooking no argument. Caelan withdrew his hand and rose. "Of course, we shall continue our conversation when you are stronger, Leora." After he had departed, Merith helped Leora prepare for bed, her efficient movements belying the curiosity evident in her expression. "He speaks of possibilities," the older woman noted, brushing out Leora's chestnut hair with brisk strokes. "What possibilities exist between a duke and a companion, I wonder?" "Former companion," Leora corrected mildly. "And I know not what he intends." Merith's brush paused mid-stroke. "Do not deceive yourself, child. A man of his station has limited options where a woman of your background is concerned. You think he offers protection without matrimony," Leora stated flatly. "I think," Merith replied carefully, "that even a changed man remains shaped by his world. The question is whether he possesses strength enough to reshape it." The following morning dawned clear and mild. Caelan arrived shortly after breakfast, finding Leora already dressed in anticipation of her first venture outdoors. The blue gown had been exchanged for one of sage green, with a matching shawl draped about her shoulders. "You look remarkably well," he observed, offering his arm. With Merith following at a discreet distance, they made their slow way through the French doors and onto the stone terrace overlooking the sea. Leora inhaled deeply, closing her eyes as the salt-laden air filled her healing lungs. "How I've missed this," she murmured. "The world beyond 4 walls." They proceeded carefully along the flagstone path, Caelan measuring his stride to accommodate her still fragile strength. Clouds scudded across the sky, their shadows racing over the water far below. "You spoke last evening of possibilities," Leora ventured after they had walked in companionable silence for several minutes. Caelan glanced behind them, where Merith had paused to examine a budding rose bush, affording them a moment of relative privacy. "I did," he acknowledged, "and they have occupied my thoughts these many weeks." He guided her to a stone bench positioned to catch the morning sun. "May we sit? There are matters I would discuss that require proper attention." Leora settled on the stone bench, arranging her skirts carefully as she faced the man whose cruel words had once banished her, and whose desperate journey had later saved her life. The morning sun cast his features in sharp relief, highlighting the new lines etched by concern and sleepless nights. "I have spent these weeks reflecting on what transpired between us," Kaelan began, his voice measured yet intimate, "on how readily I allowed malice to poison what I held most dear." "The fault was not yours alone," Leora replied, her hands folded in her lap. "I might have defended myself more vigorously, might have demanded audience rather than accepting dismissal with such submission." A smile touched his lips, though his eyes remained solemn. "Even now you seek to shoulder burdens that are rightfully mine. It was I who failed the test of faith, I who condemned without evidence." From his pocket, he withdrew a small item wrapped in silk. "Before I speak of possibilities, there is a matter requiring resolution." Leora watched with quiet intensity as he unfolded the fabric, revealing a folded document bearing the Thornwood seal. "The debt between our families," he explained, extending the paper toward her. "My father's claim against yours, which brought you to Morwind Court." With trembling fingers, she accepted the document, recognizing the formal legal language even as she skimmed its contents. At the bottom, Kaelan's bold signature declared the obligation cancelled in full. "I do not understand," she murmured, looking up to find his gaze fixed on her face. "The debt was substantial. My service, though extended beyond my obligation to your mother, could not have satisfied such a sum." "The debt was satisfied the moment you entered our household," Kaelan replied firmly. "What you gave to my mother in her final months, to the estate in your quiet management, to me in your steadfast presence, far exceeded any monetary value." Leora stared at the document, emotions warring within her breast. "You release me from obligation, then?" "I release you from all constraints," he corrected gently, "so that what remains between us may be founded solely on truth and choice." In the distance, Merith had abandoned all pretense of examining flowers and watched them openly, her weathered face betraying unusual concern. "And what does remain between us?" Leora asked, her voice barely audible above the sound of waves breaking on the cliffs below. Kaelan shifted on the bench, turning to face her more fully. "That is the possibility I wish to discuss, if you are willing." She nodded, her amber pendant catching the light as it rose and fell with her quickened breath. "When you left Morwind Court, when I cast you out, a darkness descended that I attributed to wounded pride," he began. "Only in your absence did I recognize it for what it truly was, the loss of that which gave my existence meaning beyond duty and position." He reached for her hand and she permitted him to take it, feeling the warmth of his skin against her still cool fingers. "I love you, Leora Marin," Kaelan declared, the words simple yet delivered with such conviction that they seemed to hang in the air between them. "Not as a duke loves a suitable match, nor as a man might love a fleeting fancy, but as a soul recognizes its complement." The admission, so long withheld, so earnestly delivered, left Leora momentarily speechless. For months she had carried her own love in silence, believing it impossible, inappropriate, unrequited. "You are not required to reciprocate," he continued, misinterpreting her silence. "Indeed, after my treatment of you, I would understand if—" "Hush," she interrupted, a boldness entering her voice that had been absent during her convalescence. "Do not presume to interpret my silence, Kaelan Thornwood, when you have only just learned to hear my voice." His eyes widened slightly at her tone, but he remained silent, waiting. "I loved you," she said simply, "when you were most unlovable, when your pride built walls between us, when your position created distances I could not cross. I loved you when loving you promised nothing but heartache." The tension in his shoulders eased visibly. "And now, when I offer not heartache, but healing." Leora's gaze remained steady. "What precisely do you offer, Your Grace? For a duke's love may take many forms, not all of them sanctioned by society." A flash of understanding crossed Kaelan's features, followed swiftly by something akin to horror. "You believe I propose an arrangement without honor," he said, his voice tight. "A protected position without the sanctity of marriage." "I believe nothing," Leora replied evenly. "I ask for clarity as any woman must when her future hangs in the balance." From her position several yards away, Merith had begun to advance toward them, clearly concerned by the intensity of their exchange. Kaelan rose abruptly, his aristocratic bearing reasserting itself in his straight spine and lifted chin. But instead of the cold hauteur Leora had sometimes witnessed at Morwind Court, his expression held only earnest determination. "Miss Marin," he announced formally, loud enough for Merith to hear as she approached, "I have loved you in silence, in absence, and now in the blessed light of your recovery. I ask, no, I implore you to do me the honor of becoming my wife. Not my mistress, not my protected companion, but the Duchess of Thornwood, equal in all things save the accident of birth, which matters not at all to a heart that recognizes its true partner. Merith halted mid-step, her weathered face registering shock. Leora remained seated, her complexion paling, then flushing as his words registered fully. You cannot mean it, she whispered. The Tun would never accept such a match. The Tun, Kaelin replied with surprising vehemence, has no claim upon my happiness. I have lived by its dictates, sacrificed genuine connection for appropriate alliances, and found myself hollow at the core. He knelt before the bench, heedless of the damp garden soil staining his immaculate trousers. I nearly lost you to pride and prejudice. I shall not risk losing you again to the whispers of those who know nothing of true worth. Leora's hand went instinctively to the amber pendant at her throat. You would face scandal willingly? Diminished standing among your peers? Perhaps even ostracism from certain circles? I would face the devil himself, Kaelin declared, if it meant waking each morning to your presence and retiring each night with your wisdom to guide my dreams. The poetry of his declaration might have seemed rehearsed from another man, but Leora had observed Kaelin Thornwood long enough to recognize genuine emotion beneath his formal language. Merith, recovering her composure, moved to stand beside Leora. Your Grace, she interjected, her tone respectful but firm. Miss Marin remains in recovery. Such monumental decisions require full health and clear mind. Kaelin nodded, rising to his feet with fluid grace. You are right, of course. I have allowed enthusiasm to overwhelm proper consideration for Miss Marin's condition. He extended his hand to Leora. Forgive me. I shall not press for an answer until Dr. Ellis declares you fully recovered. Leora accepted his assistance in rising from the bench, her legs somewhat unsteady after the emotional exchange. There is nothing to forgive, she replied softly, but Merith speaks wisdom. This is a matter requiring careful reflection. They returned to the house in thoughtful silence, the Duke solicitously matching his stride to Leora's measured pace. At the threshold, he bowed formally before departing for the village, leaving the women to the quiet routine of Leora's recovery. Later that afternoon, as Merith prepared a tisane by the bedroom fire, she broke the silence that had persisted since the garden proposal. You love him, she stated matter-of-factly, stirring the aromatic brew with practiced movements. Is it so evident? Leora asked, gazing out the window at the sea beyond. To anyone with eyes, Merith confirmed, approaching with the steaming cup, as is his love for you. A rare thing, that. A nobleman who values substance over form. Leora accepted the tisane, inhaling its herbal fragrance. Yet the world he inhabits values form above all else. To elevate someone of my station to Duchess would invite constant scrutiny, perpetual judgment. And yet, Merith observed shrewdly, you do not reject the possibility outright. You fear the consequences, not the connection. Is it wrong to fear what might destroy us both? Leora asked, her voice betraying vulnerability beneath its composure. His world would never truly accept me. My world, such as it was, would no longer claim me as its own. We would exist in a limbo of society's making. The older woman seated herself beside the bed, her customary severity softening into something like maternal concern. I have lived long enough to know that happiness rarely comes without cost. The question is not whether there is a price, but whether the joy purchased is worth the payment demanded. April yielded to May, and with the changing season came noticeable improvement in Leora's health. Dr. Ellis, visiting now just once weekly, pronounced her lungs healing well, though he cautioned that complete recovery might require many months more. The sea air continues to benefit you, he observed during his latest examination. I would recommend remaining at Hammond House through summer at least. Kaelin, who had taken to attending these medical consultations with Merith's grudging permission, nodded thoughtfully. That can certainly be arranged. The property is secured through September. Following the doctor's departure, they walked together in what had become a daily ritual, a turn about the clifftop garden, Merith following at a distance that provided privacy while maintaining propriety. Though Kaelin had not repeated his proposal since that April morning, the unresolved question hung between them, acknowledged in glances and careful conversations that skirted its edges. Today, however, Leora sensed a change in his demeanor, a certain tension in his shoulders, a formality in his manner that had been absent in recent weeks. You have received news, she observed. as they paused by the garden wall overlooking the sea. His eyebrows rose slightly. "How did you know?" "Your left hand," she replied with a small smile. "You flex it unconsciously when matters of thornwood require attention." Kaelin glanced down at the offending appendage, then chuckled softly. "You have observed me more closely than I realized. A companion skill," she reminded him gently. "What troubles you?" He sighed, gazing out at the horizon where sky met water in a seamless line of blue. "A letter from my solicitor. The Earl of Kenrick's daughter, Lady Penelope, has arrived at Morwynd Court with her mother. It seems they were invited for an extended stay, an invitation issued months ago before I sent 4 words that changed everything," Leora completed quietly. "Yes." He turned to face her fully, his expression troubled. "The invitation was extended with certain expectations. The Earl has long sought connection between our families." Understanding dawned swiftly. "A match between yourself and Lady Penelope." "It was never formalized," Kaelin hastened to assure her. "Merely an understanding between houses of similar standing. I had not given it serious consideration until Lady Serena began her whispers about you and Lord Arden." The revelation struck Leora with unexpected force. In the quiet weeks of her recovery, surrounded by Kaelin's attentions and declarations, she had allowed herself to forget the world that awaited beyond Hammond House, a world of arrangements and alliances, of expectations and obligations that had shaped aristocratic marriages for centuries. "You must return to Morwynd Court," she said, her voice carefully controlled. "Your guests require proper reception." "They are not my primary concern," he replied, his tone hardening. "You are." Leora shook her head, amber pendant swinging gently with the movement. "I am recovering well. Dr. Ellis confirms it. Your position demands attention, Kaelin. You cannot hide away in Brackenridge Haven indefinitely, playing nursemaid to a former companion." His expression darkened at her deliberate diminishment of her status. "Is that how you see yourself still, after all that has passed between us?" "It is how the world sees me," she answered simply, "and the world has now come calling at Morwynd Court in the form of a suitable match with expectations of your attention." For a moment, the Duke of Thornwood seemed to battle within himself, aristocratic duty warring with personal desire. Then his features settled into resolve. "You are right that I must return," he conceded, "but not to entertain false expectations. Rather to clarify where my future lies." He reached for her hands, holding them firmly between his own. "I have given you time to consider my proposal, Leora. I have respected your need for recovery and reflection, but now I must ask, have you reached a decision?" The directness of his question, delivered with such earnest intensity, momentarily robbed Leora of breath. In truth, she had spent every day since his proposal weighing possibilities against probabilities, desire against wisdom. "I have," she replied, her voice steadying as she committed to her path. "And before I give you my answer, I would ask something of you." "Anything," he promised immediately. "Return to Morwynd Court. Receive your guests with the courtesy your position demands. Spend 1 week, just one, in the society that has shaped your life since birth." Her amber eyes held his without wavering. "Then, if your heart remains unchanged, return to Hammond House, and I shall give you my answer." Confusion creased his brow. "You doubt my constancy?" "No," she assured him gently. "I doubt not your heart, but the world's power to sway it. Lady Penelope represents everything society deems appropriate for a man of your standing. I would have you see that contrast clearly before binding yourself to a choice you might regret." "I require no such test," Kaelin insisted, a hint of the old ducal pride coloring his tone. "Perhaps not," Leora acknowledged, "but I do. I would not have you sacrifice position and respect only to harbor secret regret in years to come." She withdrew her hands from his grasp. 1 week, Kaelin. Consider it my final convalescence, the healing of certainty. The week following Kaelin's departure stretched interminably at Hammond House. Though Leora filled her days with steady progress, longer walks along the cliff path, afternoons reading in the garden, evenings penning entries in the journal Merith had provided, her thoughts remained fixed on Morwynd Court and what might be transpiring there. "You torture yourself unnecessarily," Merith observed on the 5th evening, finding Leora at the window, her amber pendant twisted absently between her fingers as she gazed toward the road from the village. "If the Duke's devotion were so easily swayed, it would not be worth having. It is not his devotion I question," Leora replied softly. "It is society's power to wound what it cannot understand." The healer approached, her perpetual frown softened by genuine concern. "You fear the world's cruelty should you accept his proposal. I fear its effect on him," Leora corrected. "Kaelan has lived his entire life guided by certain principles, duty, tradition, expectation. To forsake them for love," she shook her head. "The sacrifice may prove greater than he anticipates." Merith's weathered hand came to rest on Leora's shoulder. "And what of your sacrifice? To refuse happiness from fear of future regret. Is that not its own form of tragedy?" The question lingered unanswered as the women retired for the evening. The following afternoon brought an unexpected visitor. Leora, reading in the garden, looked up to find a slender woman in elegant riding attire standing before her, honey blonde hair escaping its pins beneath a fashionable hat. "Miss Marin, I presume?" the stranger inquired, her voice cultured but not unkind. Leora rose slowly, marking her place in her book. "Yes, and you are?" "Lady Penelope Hartwood," the woman replied with a slight curtsy. "I hope you will forgive the intrusion. The Duke mentioned your convalescence here, and since I was riding in the vicinity, understanding bloomed like a cold flower in Leora's chest. This was Kaelan's suitable match, the Earl's daughter, whose presence at Morwind Court represented everything society deemed appropriate. "Of course," Leora responded, gesturing to the bench beside her. "Please join me. Merith can bring refreshments if you wish." "That won't be necessary," Lady Penelope assured her, settling gracefully onto the stone seat. "I cannot stay long. My mother believes I am simply exercising the mare." A conspiratorial smile curved her lips. She would hardly approve of this visit. Leora studied the young aristocrat carefully. Lady Penelope possessed the refined beauty expected of her station. Delicate features, flawless complexion, and an innate elegance that no amount of training could bestow upon someone of humbler birth. "May I ask why you sought me out?" Leora ventured, her voice steadier than she felt. Lady Penelope removed her riding gloves, revealing slender fingers adorned with a single pearl ring. "Curiosity, primarily. The Duke speaks of little else but your recovery. One naturally wishes to meet the woman who has so thoroughly captured his attention." Heat rose to Leora's cheeks. "His Grace has been most considerate during my illness." "His Grace," Lady Penelope remarked with surprising directness, "is utterly transformed since his return from Brackenridge Haven. His former reserve has given way to a certain intensity that has the entire household walking on eggshells." "I'm sorry to hear it," Leora replied, uncertain how to respond to such candor. "Don't be," the aristocrat advised with a small laugh. "It is refreshing to see genuine feeling in a man of his position. So many of our circle hide behind masks of propriety." She tilted her head, studying Leora with frank curiosity. "You were his mother's companion, were you not?" "I was," Leora confirmed, her hand instinctively finding the amber pendant at her throat. Lady Penelope nodded thoughtfully. "That explains it then." "Explains what?" Leora asked, despite herself. "Why he values you so." The young woman's gaze was surprisingly kind. "You knew him before duty became his prison. You witnessed his genuine grief, not the performance of mourning society required." She hesitated before adding, "My own mother was acquainted with the Dowager Duchess. She spoke often of how the illness transformed her, and how her companion provided comfort when family could not." Leora found herself momentarily speechless. Of all the scenarios she had imagined regarding Lady Penelope, this sympathetic understanding had never featured among them. "Your words are most generous," she managed finally. "Not generous," Lady Penelope corrected, "merely observant. Our positions afford us different perspectives, Miss Marin, but they need not make us adversaries." She rose with fluid grace, retrieving her gloves. "I should return before my absence is noted. I merely wished to satisfy my curiosity, and perhaps to deliver a message." "A message?" Leora echoed, rising as well. "The Duke departs Morwind Court tomorrow," Lady Penelope informed her. "He has endured the required social obligations with remarkable patience, though his thoughts were clearly elsewhere." A knowing smile touched her lips. "My mother is most disappointed. The Earl, surprisingly less so. He remarked just yesterday that a man so clearly fixed in his affections would make a poor husband for his daughter." With those parting words, Lady Penelope departed as suddenly as she had arrived, leaving Leora to contemplate this unexpected alliance in a world she had assumed would be universally hostile. That evening, as Merith helped her prepare for bed, Leora recounted the strange encounter. "So the rival herself delivers news of his return," the healer mused, brushing out Leora's chestnut hair with practiced strokes. What do you make of it? That assumptions, even those born of experience, can prove false, Leora replied thoughtfully. Lady Penelope seemed genuinely pleased by Caelan's devotion, though it was directed elsewhere. Perhaps she harbors affection for another, Merith suggested pragmatically. Many young ladies of quality find themselves sacrificed on the altar of advantageous matches. Leora nodded, remembering the pearl ring on Lady Penelope's hand. Simple for someone of her station, perhaps a token from one whose position prevented formal courtship. Whatever her reasons, she offered kindness when she might have exhibited scorn. A hopeful sign, Merith acknowledged, setting down the brush. Have you prepared your answer for the Duke's return? I have, Leora confirmed, though her heart quickened at the thought of delivering it. Sleep proved elusive that night, her mind cycling through possibilities, rehearsing words only to discard them as inadequate. Dawn found her at the window, watching as golden light spilled across the distant sea, transforming grey waters into molten glass. Merith entered with a steaming cup of tea, her sharp eyes noting Leora's vigil. He may not arrive until afternoon, the healer cautioned. The journey from Morwen Court requires several hours in good weather. I know, Leora replied, accepting the tea gratefully. Yet I find myself unable to focus on anything else. The morning passed with painful slowness. Leora attempted reading, needlework, and even a brief walk in the garden, but each activity failed to hold her attention. By noon, even Merith's legendary patience had frayed. For heaven's sake, child, the older woman exclaimed, your restlessness exhausts me. Go wait on the terrace if you must, but cease this constant wandering. Suitably chastened, Leora took up position on the stone terrace overlooking the approach to Hammond House. The May sunshine warmed her face as she settled into a wicker chair, her amber pendant catching the light as it rose and fell with each breath. It was there that Caelan found her some hours later, having arrived on horseback rather than by carriage to expedite his journey. Dust from the road clung to his greatcoat, and his usually immaculate appearance showed signs of haste, yet he moved with purpose as he approached. Leora, he called, striding across the lawns without waiting for formal announcement. She rose to meet him, heart thundering in her chest as he bounded up the terrace steps and came to stand before her, dark eyes searching her face with naked emotion. You have honored my request, she observed, striving for composure despite the turmoil within. To the letter, if not the spirit, he admitted with a rueful smile. I fear I made a poor host this past week. My thoughts never strayed far from Brackenridge Haven. Lady Penelope mentioned as much, Leora replied, watching his reaction carefully. Surprise flickered across his features. You have spoken with her? She paid me a visit yesterday, Leora explained. Quite unexpected, but illuminating. Caelan's brow furrowed. What did she say? That you were transformed, Leora answered simply. That genuine feeling had replaced aristocratic reserve, that her father now believes you would make a poor husband for his daughter. A bark of laughter escaped him. Kenwick said as much to my face yesterday. Thornwood, he declared over port, a man so thoroughly besotted with another has no business contemplating marriage to my Penelope. I believe it was intended as a reprimand, but I received it as a blessing. And how did Lady Penelope receive it? Leora inquired. With what appeared to be relief, Caelan replied, his expression thoughtful. I suspect her heart, like mine, has found its own direction regardless of family expectation. They stood in momentary silence, the significance of the moment stretching between them. I have kept my part of our agreement, Caelan said finally, his voice gentle yet urgent. I have returned to society, faced its expectations and emerged with my heart unchanged, save perhaps that it beats more certainly for you than ever before. He took a careful step closer. Will you now keep yours and give me your answer? Epilogue. The great hall of Morwen Court blazed with candlelight, its ancient oak beams adorned with summer roses and ivy for the occasion. Through the tall windows, the June sunset cast golden rays across assembled guests who represented a curious blend of aristocracy and village folk, a social mingling unprecedented in the estate's long history. At the center of it all stood the Duke of Thornwood and his bride of 1 hour, their hands clasped as they received congratulations from the eclectic gathering. Leora, resplendent in a gown of ivory silk with amber accents that complemented her pendant, bore little resemblance to the frail woman who had summoned Caelan with 4 desperate words just months earlier. Mrs. Hollins is positively scandalized by the tenant farmers in her drawing room, Leora whispered behind her fan as the housekeeper bustled past with a tray of champagne, her pinched expression belying the celebratory atmosphere. She will adapt. Kaelin replied, his voice warm with amusement. As must we all to changing tides. Those tides had indeed shifted dramatically since that May afternoon on the terrace at Hammond House, when Leora had finally given her answer. Yes, she would become his wife, but on conditions that honored both their worlds rather than forcing one to subsume the other. The ceremony itself reflected this balance, conducted with all the dignity befitting the Duke's position, yet incorporating elements that acknowledged Leora's simpler background. Her bridal bouquet combined traditional roses with wildflowers gathered from the cliffs of Brackenridge Haven. Merith Caldor, resplendent despite her obvious discomfort in formal attire, had stood as Leora's witness. And perhaps most significantly, the guest list had disregarded conventional social boundaries, including tenants and villagers, alongside earls and countesses. "Your Grace," Lady Penelope approached with a genuine smile, her mother hovering anxiously in the background. "Or should I say Your Grace and Your Grace? The title suits you both remarkably well." "You are too kind," Leora responded warmly, "and I must thank you again for your courage in visiting Hammond House that day. Your insights proved most valuable." The young aristocrat glanced meaningfully across the room to where a young man in naval uniform stood conversing with Kaelin's steward. "Sometimes we must follow unconventional paths to find genuine happiness. I merely helped illuminate yours." She squeezed Leora's hand briefly before moving on, her mother following with a stiff nod of acknowledgement. Not all reactions had been so gracious, of course. Lady Sirena had declined her invitation with a tersely worded note predicting social calamity. Several of Kaelin's peers had expressed thinly veiled disapproval, while others had simply chosen absence over witnessing what they considered an unsuitable match. Yet for each absence, there seemed a surprising presence to balance the scales. The Earl of Kenwick himself had attended, declaring with surprising good humour that any woman who could effect such transformation in Thornwood's famous reserve must be a force worth recognising. Dr. Ellis had travelled from Brackenridge Haven, as had the village shopkeepers who had supplied Hammond House during Leora's convalescence. "I believe Mrs. Hollins might faint if Farmer Crenshaw attempts another country dance," Kaelin observed, nodding toward the elderly tenant who had already scandalised the housekeeper by requesting music more suited to harvest festivals than ducal weddings. Leora laughed, the sound drawing appreciative glances from nearby guests still adjusting to the notion of a duchess who expressed joy without restraint. "Then perhaps we should scandalise her further by joining him." Before Kaelin could respond, Merith appeared at Leora's elbow, her customary severity momentarily softened by the occasion. "If I might have a word with the bride." With a gracious nod, Kaelin stepped aside, allowing the women a moment of privacy amid the celebration. "I return to Brackenridge Haven tomorrow," Merith announced without preamble. "My work here is complete." Leora's expression registered momentary sadness. "You have become far more than a healer to me, Merith. Hammond House shall remain yours for as long as you wish it." The older woman shook her head firmly. "My place is with those who need healing, not in borrowed grandeur, but I wish to give you something before I depart." From the pocket of her dress, fashionable but clearly uncomfortable for its wearer, Merith withdrew a small package wrapped in linen. Leora unwrapped it carefully to reveal a slender book bound in worn leather. "Your herbal," she gasped, recognizing the precious compendium of medicinal knowledge Merith had compiled over decades. "You showed aptitude during your recovery," the healer explained gruffly, "and a duchess with knowledge of healing arts might bridge worlds in ways beyond marriage to a duke." Tears threatened to spoil Leora's carefully applied cosmetics. "I shall treasure it, and your wisdom, always." As Merith moved away, Kaelin returned to his bride's side, his gaze questioning. "Happy tears, I hope." "Grateful ones," Leora corrected, tucking the precious book into the special pocket sewn into her wedding gown. "For 4 words that nearly cost my life, but ultimately saved it in ways I never imagined." He took her hand, raising it to his lips with formal grace that nonetheless conveyed deep intimacy. "Come before it's too late," he murmured against her fingers. "And you did," she whispered. The musicians began a waltz then, the first of the evening, and the crowd parted expectantly. By tradition, the Duke and his new Duchess would lead the assembly, establishing the tone for celebrations to follow. As Kaelin guided her to the center of the great hall, Leora felt the weight of history and expectation. The amber pendant at her throat caught the candlelight, transforming from simple stone to luminous talisman. It had witnessed her banishment, her desperate summons, her near death, and now her elevation to a position she had never sought, but would fill with the same quiet strength that had sustained her. through hardship. "Are you prepared for this dance, Your Grace?" Kaelin murmured as they took their positions. Leora smiled, recognizing the question addressed not merely to this moment, but to the life they were beginning, a life that would challenge conventions, bridge worlds, and require both to adapt without surrendering essence. "I have been preparing since the moment you banished me with cruel words," she replied softly, "for it was then I learned that true strength lies not in position, but in survival, not in titles, but in truth." As the music swelled and they began to move in perfect harmony, the gathered assembly, aristocrats and villagers alike, bore witness to the transformation of a banishment into a homecoming, of 4 desperate words into a lifetime of conversation, of cruelty redeemed through courage. And in that moment, as sunset yielded to the gentle embrace of summer twilight, Morwen Court itself seemed to exhale, as if centuries of rigid tradition had finally given way to something both ancient and new, the recognition that love, when genuine, transcends all barriers of circumstance and station. "4 words brought me back to you," Kaelin whispered, as they turned beneath the ancestral chandeliers. "How many more might we exchange in the lifetime ahead?" "Enough," Leora answered simply, "to heal whatever wounds the world may inflict. Enough to build bridges where others see only walls. Enough," she concluded as the music reached its crescendo, "to transform banishment into belonging." And as the waltz concluded to appreciative applause, the Duke and Duchess of Thornwood stood not as aristocrat and former companion, but as 2 people who had discovered the most profound truth of all, that love's vocabulary, whether 4 words or 4,000, speaks a language that transcends the boundaries of class, convention, and cruelty, if only we have the courage to listen. In life's darkest moments, when pride blinds us to what truly matters, it often takes imminent loss to illuminate our hearts. 4 simple words, whether spoken in desperation or love, can bridge chasms that seem impassable. This story reminds us that true healing begins not when we hide our wounds behind walls of pride, but when we summon the courage to extend our hand across the divide. Society may dictate the boundaries of propriety, but the human heart recognizes no such limitations when it finds its authentic connection. Our cruelest words can be redeemed by our bravest actions, and what appears to be an ending may, with courage and forgiveness, become the most beautiful beginning. Remember that sometimes the greatest distances are not those measured in miles, but in the space between speaking truth and remaining silent. Has this tale of redemption, courage, and love against all odds touched your heart? If the Duke and Leora's journey from cruel banishment to healing reunion moved you, we invite you to subscribe to our channel for more Victorian romance stories that explore the depths of human emotion. Leave a comment sharing which moment resonated most deeply with you. Was it Kaelin's desperate journey through the storm, Leora's brave conditions for acceptance, or perhaps their transformative first waltz as Duke and Duchess? Your engagement helps us continue bringing these timeless stories to life. And remember, even the smallest words, when spoken from the heart, have the power to change destinies forever. With deepest gratitude from all of us at Victorian Romance Audio Stories, we thank you for joining us on this emotional journey. May your own path be illuminated by words that heal rather than wound, and courage that transforms banishment into belonging.